Great, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tom Burdett, Vice Chair of House Judiciary. Chair Lalonde will be here shortly. He's down at a press conference. But we're going to have a walkthrough from Michelle on H371, an act relating to removal of criminal penalties for possessing, dispensing, selling psilocybin, and establishment of the Psychedelic Therapy Advisory Working Group. It's all yours.
Great, thanks. Good afternoon. For the record, Michelle Childs, Legislative Counsel. We're taking up H371 as introduced. And the bill is pretty straightforward in that there is the removal of the criminal penalties for psilocybin, and then there's establishment of the working group. So first section of the bill are legislative findings, and I could go through those with you, but I see you've got a lot of witnesses, and I'm sure that they're going to talk about a lot of this, and so I don't think you necessarily need me to read through those for you. So I'm going to move on to page 4 of the bill, section 2. So we're working in Title 18, Chapter 84, Regulated Drug Chapter. I think you guys already have had a few bills that we've discussed in here about that. So that's Chapter 84 is where we have regulated drugs like cannabis and cocaine, heroin, those types of things. There's also a section in Chapter 84 for hallucinogenic drugs, and that is where psilocybin falls. And so if you look at Section 2, and we're amending the definition of 4201. So you see the current definition of hallucinogenic drugs that starts there on line 14. And so what this is doing is simply striking psilocybin from the list of hallucinogenic drugs within the regulated drug chapter. And then you'll see at the top of page 5, there's just a little clarifying language that hallucinogenic drugs does not include psilocybin for purposes of this particular chapter. And so this is removing everything within Chapter 84 there. I'll just for reference, let you know kind of what some of the current penalties are. This is, like in some of our statutes, like if you look at cannabis or you look at cocaine or you look at heroin, we're using very specific amounts. So we're using ounces or grams or however, depending on the statute. But hallucinogenic drugs goes by dosage. And so when you think about the way that our drug statutes are organized, there's always a subsection A that is possession. And then you have and then it increases, the penalties increase based on the amount possessed. And then you have subsection B that is for dispensing and sale, and same thing. And so for possession, what we have through all of the, or most of the regulated drugs is the possession of any amount unlawfully. And this is usually this is the small amounts, is a 1-year misdemeanor. And then if you possess 10 doses, that moves you into 3-year felony territory. So just in thinking about the lower end there.
So that's now or new language?
That's current language. There would be no penalties under this. And so as you know, there's a lot of room, for those of you who were here when the legislature first decriminalized and then legalized an ounce or less of cannabis, there's a lot of room between having no regulation and removing all the penalties and having it in the criminal code. So there's options in between there in terms of, you can consider decriminalization. So where it's a civil penalty, which is what we did with cannabis in 2013. So that's like a traffic ticket. But again, this is just taking it out of Chapter 84 so that it would not be considered a regulated drug under the chapter. So there's no penalties, no civil or criminal penalties in here. Okay. In the next section, and also just to mention, psilocybin is a Schedule I drug according to the Controlled Substances Act. So Schedule I drugs are those drugs that they have determined to have no medical value and a high. I didn't make it up. I had to determine
High recreational value.
They have, according to the Controlled Substances Act, they're put in that category as having no medical value and a high potential for abuse. And so other things that are in Schedule 1 are cannabis, heroin, things like that. So, and I'm sure some of the witnesses will talk to you about the movement towards rescheduling, which looks like it's on the horizon. So if you look at page 5, section 3, this is establishing a psychedelic therapy advisory working group. There's, as you, I think you've probably heard, so Oregon and Colorado have taken steps to liberalize their laws around psilocybin and are looking at setting up regulatory structures for people to be able to provide psilocybin to patients and in a therapeutic setting. Connecticut also, if you decide to move forward and talk more about this, Connecticut passed legislation and they created their own working group and they issued a report last year. I was trying to track the bill now, but House Judiciary in Connecticut just passed a decriminalization bill for psilocybin, but I don't think it's made its way to the floor yet. Also, Texas has a working group on this topic as well. I know, a little bit of a surprise there. And there may be others. So section 3 is creating this working group, and you'll see starting on subsection A, to examine the use of psychedelics to improve physical and mental health and to make recommendations regarding the establishment of a state program similar to Connecticut, Colorado, Oregon to permit healthcare providers to administer psychedelics in a therapeutic setting. So here's the folks in subsection B who would be on this working group. It'd be 2 current members from the House who aren't from the same party, 2 current members of the Senate, same thing. There would be an appointment from the Vermont Psychological Association, a researcher appointed by the Behavioral Pharmacology Research Unit at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, the director of OPR or their designee. Moving on to page 6, and the last person would be a member appointed by Decriminalize Nature. And in subsection C, sets forth the things that the working group is supposed to take a look at. First one being reviewing the latest research and evidence on the benefits and risks of clinical psychedelic assisted treatments. Second one is looking at the laws and programs of other states who have already are a little bit ahead of us on this. Third one is providing an opportunity for individuals with lived experience to provide testimony. And the fourth one is to provide potential timelines for universal and equitable access to psychedelic assisted treatments. Subsection D is they will have the pleasure of my counsel and staffing on that committee. So don't everybody volunteer wants to be on that committee. And subsection E is that the report would be provided in November of next year. So not this year. So it would be, essentially a year and a half of time for them to meet. And the report would go to the committees on Judiciary and on Healthcare and Human Services with recommendations for any legislative action. So page 7 for the meetings, this is just the usual stuff. I'll just draw your attention to subsection G. There is a limit of 8 meetings for the committee. There are per diems and compensation for folks who are not paid to be there. So this would be something in terms of an appropriation, and this will have to go to the money committee. That's it.
Any questions for Michelle at this point? Great. And you said you have to go to another committee, right?
I do. I'm going to sit here for a couple of minutes and then I've got to do Human Services, but I'll be back as soon as I can, but probably on Zoom so I can go back and forth.
Pop up.
Yeah.
Okay, first on the list, or second on the list, I guess it would be. I'm going to go right in order of what my agenda has, and it's Representative Troiano.
I thought we could, Representative Chena and I could kind of co-present this and get both of us on about the same time.
I just introduce you, as you know, introduce yourself for the record, and off we'll go.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm Representative Chip Troiano. I represent Hardwick, Center, and Walden, and I'm here to on H 371, which is a bill that Brian and I had drafted by the council. So I guess I just wanted to do a little introduction. I was contacted by former Representative Mary Sullivan, who's here in the room today, to contact Rick Barnett, Dr. Rick Barnett, regarding a psilocybin bill that so we could remove some penalties and work toward a therapeutic model in use in Vermont. So Rick and I had coffee about a year and a half ago, and we decided that similar to the progression that we made with cannabis is that we thought that decriminalization to start with, and some findings to alert people as to some of the research that's being done around the country, and third, to form a study group that could help to guide us into a therapeutic model. We know that psilocybin is has no addictive qualities. It's not a daily use drug. And Dr. Barnett will tell you a little bit more about it. It's sometimes a single use in therapy. Sometimes it's 2 or 3 times months apart. So we can really rely on that when we think in terms of decriminalization. And Brian would like to comment some on the findings.
Yeah, so some of you probably heard, this is Representative Brian Sheena from Burlington, Chittenden 15, part of the Old North End and most of the East District. Some of you have heard from me before on this topic, because for years I've been advocating for us to decriminalize nature, for the government to get out of the way of people and their birthright to plant fungal medicines that are commonly used for medicinal, spiritual, religious, or entheogenic purposes. So this for me is an extension of that work. So I do want to share a little bit of the findings on and the history of some of these treatments. So psilocybe mushrooms, there's evidence that humans have been using them for over 70,000 years, traced back to cave paintings in Africa. Many cultures around the world have use of psilocybe mushrooms in their religious ceremonies, and I will say that in my own personal experience that I have been able to benefit from healing from using plant fungal medicines in various ceremonies in my life, and one of the ways that let me just read a few citations. There's so much findings, and we're going to hear from some experts to get into the details. So I'm just going to hit a few highlights and then hand it off to the next person. But one thing I'll point out is that the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs has launched clinical trials to study the effectiveness of psychedelic drugs, including psilocybin, as treatment for vets who experience PTSD. That Johns Hopkins Center for Psychedelic Consciousness Research has been examining the benefits of psilocybin, and there was a study that demonstrated substantial antidepressant effects of psilocybin-assisted therapy when it's used for at least 12 months, including psychotherapy with it. And there's a study that looks at using psilocybin to quit smoking. So what we're finding is the more that science looks into the benefits of plant fungal medicines, science is proving what many cultures have known for thousands and thousands of years, which is that the earth has given us medicines in these plant and fungi that can help heal us, and not only heal us, but raise our consciousness and raise our connectivity. And at this time in history, when we see a planet that is out of balance and people struggling with record levels of addiction, suicide rates at record levels, that maybe it's time to look back at the wisdom of our ancestors and combine that with the cutting edge of science and offer people access to these treatments. And I'll end just by saying that it was a nice surprise today to hear that Brattleboro Retreat, we have Devin here, Devin Green from VOS, the Vermont Association of Hospital and Healthcare Systems. Brattleboro Retreat is interested in doing this treatment. And so we have providers in Vermont who are ready and willing to learn and implement these practices. And I don't know who's next. I think it might be a provider, right?
It is Yeah, Rory.
Okay, so there's providers who will be speaking, but I think first we're going to hear from people who have experienced benefits of psychedelics.
So I just wanted to,
No, go ahead.
So I just wanted to wrap our piece up is Michelle, Ledge Council, has gone through the membership of the study committee. I think we included folks that are part of the research in this and some legislators, and I think we have a good variety of folks that hopefully can come back to us and make recommendations, hopefully following possibly the Oregon model, which is in place now, and they created the Oregon Health Association, the OHA, and that organization is training therapists and clinicians to use psilocybin in a clinical way with absolute control and safety to the participants, that the folks that are taking care of it. I just wanted to conclude when I started to research this, and I found that this could be useful in post-traumatic stress. Some of you may have heard me in the past talk about my battle with post-traumatic stress in the past, and that when I heard that this has good possibilities, and my research in the past has gone to connections between episodic depression triggering post-traumatic stress, and certainly just about anyone could be subject to episodic depression at any time in their life. And for someone who has accomplished a great deal in overcoming their post-traumatic stress, I think in terms of this is something that the VA is looking at it certainly, and it's not in a pill bottle. It caught my interest, and hopefully we'll be able to move forward on a therapeutic model that can treat soldiers that come back with post-traumatic stress.
Tom, did you have a question? Okay, Will.
Thank you.
I know Will does.
So I have two questions, and you two might not be the perfect people to ask, but you're my colleagues, so I'm going to throw them at you, and then it sort of tease it up for anyone else who
We'll let you know.
could add as they go. And so the first is the report will be due on November 15th, 2024. And your representatives, you know where we're at, just a week before we plan to adjourn. So we're not going to pass this out this session. Correct. So if this were to be taken up next session and passed out at some point next year, I'd be curious to know what this date would have to be pushed back to. So that's the first question. Again, I don't necessarily expect you to have an answer.
Well, I think that's probably a decision of the committee. Certainly, if the committee sees that there would be a date that would be more advantageous to having some time to take it up, certainly that's your prerogative to do and to make that change as a committee. Yeah, I see that. That's the way it could happen.
Right, but I would just want to know what would be a reasonable amount of time based on when we could potentially pass this out, how much time should be given for the work to be done in the.
Okay, so that I would defer to Dr. Burnett for that. He might have some answers to that information.
And my other question is, tell me if I'm wrong. So if we were to decriminalize this, I mean, this is something that could be grown in Vermont, and we would have the capacity, I would imagine, to meet our own needs in state. So am I correct in assuming that if we were to do this, it would also in effect open up at least a small niche market for some Vermont growers?
I think that's accurate. That would be safe to say. I don't think that's in great detail in the bill, but again, as a committee, certainly that could be discussed and on that.
That might send it to ag.
Right, there's probably a piece for appropriations or ways and means or both. So we anticipate this bill might travel around the House, but ultimately, hopefully, we'll get to the Senate. The Senate has the identical bill. And certainly between the two houses, I think maybe we could come to some good conclusions. But market is something that we haven't discussed. Yeah.
I would just like to point out that it says that the report is due on or before November 15, 2024. So although the committee should take more testimony to make your decision, my initial suggestion would be that if this bill if you can't pass it this year and have the rules committee make an exemption and rush it out by next Friday, which I don't think you can do, then it would be to maybe have progress reports throughout next year, throughout the summer, and maybe extend the final report. But there's no reason why we can't come into a new biennium knowing what the group has done so far. So that would be my suggestion for that. Would be just like, like you would want to change the end date of the final report, but there's no reason why there couldn't be progress. Oh, and there is one last thing I would say, which is, because you were talking about committees of jurisdiction. To me, I know that this bill has to come to this committee, but I think that that's wrong. Like, substance use should be treated as a healthcare matter, not as a criminal matter. So hopefully someday when we're talking about substance use, we don't even have to run it by judiciary anymore. And maybe you could be part of that liberation. I'm all set.
Great, thank you. Thank you.
Good, thank you.
And next up is it Van Tuinen? Van Tynen, okay, Rory Van Tynen.
You want to come up here?
Yep. Yeah, if you could, Rory,
Might be a little hot after we
can you sit down, just introduce yourself for the record and,
All right. My name is Rory Van Tynen. I was asked to come here and speak about my personal lived experience through addiction, and I had a psilocybin experience. So I don't know where to start. I guess I'll just start from the beginning. When I was in high school, when I was in high school, I had a car accident and I broke my neck. So I was sent. So I ended up in the ICU. Woke up 3 days after the accident. Sent home with 120 Dilaudid 2, which my parents are both medical. My dad's a doctor. I'm also a psychiatric nurse. They both thought it was way too much to prescribe, but the doctor said, no, that's nonsense. Take this much. And anyway, I'm not to put blame on anyone, but just that kind of put me into, that's kind of where my opioid addiction or story started. Fast forward, 10 years, I had been using drugs for 10 years and have been on methadone for 7 years. I didn't really see a way out. I had hoped that at some point I'd be able to get off methadone, but I really didn't believe that I ever would, just based on where my lifestyle was at. I mean, methadone certainly saves lives, but for me, I just kind of perpetuated the drug use. And I know this isn't necessarily about opiates, but so anyway, it wasn't until I had a psychedelic experience that I was brought to by someone close to me. The person brought it to my attention and said this could be helpful. They're using this in therapeutic ways now, and it could be beneficial for you for your addiction. I was like, I said that I didn't believe it, I didn't want to believe it. I said there's no way this can help because I've taken psychedelics when I was younger. Basically, I think the reality of what I was saying was, yeah, they probably can help, but I'm scared as hell to try them because there's a lot of potential with them. But anyway, I didn't want to believe it, so I pushed it off for a few months. Eventually, one day, I kind of gave in. I said, all right, whatever, I'll try it. What's the worst that's going to happen? I'm going to have a 4 hour or 5 or 6 hour experience that either I'm not going to enjoy or I am. We'll see. So miraculously, after that experience, I had stopped using heroin, which I was using pretty much every day, but I stopped using overnight, just like that. But I was still on methadone. So at that point, basically the psilocybin experience basically renewed in me this spiritual foundation, because I had severed my connection with spirit from the opioids for 10 years, and I really didn't see any potential for my life at this point. So this psilocybin experience really opened up this new foundation of belief and potential in myself, and so from there I had all this newfound energy, and So I created a plan to get off the methadone. I was on a high dose, I was on 120, I think it was over 120 milligrams, which is considered a high dose. The doctor said it should be a 2-year taper minimum. But I was so motivated and convicted of the belief that I needed to get off it in order to save my life. I got off it within 3 months, and it was kind of after that I just got clean from all the opioids, which in my adult life, previous to that, the longest time I'd ever stayed clean was maybe 2 to 3 weeks, and at this point, I stayed clean for 14 months. I did eventually kind of go back, relapse after the 14 months. And I think if anything, that kind of speaks, to this bill, it kind of speaks to the idea that these things are being illegal. It doesn't really allow for support groups and talking and openness and community connection where, we can have these types of therapies because, I don't know. It just kind of speaks to that for me. It's like with these being illegal, it just keeps it very difficult. Makes it very difficult to even have conversation about these substances. And obviously, there's a lot of potential with them. And that's not up for me to decide. I'm just here telling my story. And I think to me, it's like, why are we denying ourselves as humans the potential to even research and study these substances? By making them illegal, we're not even allowing ourselves to study them. I mean, scientists aren't even allowed to. They have to go through all these, back channels to get the rights to study them. And I don't know. It just seems like a no-brainer to me to at least have these decriminalized to the point where, because having them be illegal, it just kind of perpetuates the idea of a drug is a drug, and it's just not my experience. Anyway, so that's all I really have to share. I'm very passionate that that psilocybin, a natural occurring substance in the wild, should be deemed decriminalized, and people should have access to the therapies, whether it be through medicalization or through their own practice. So it was a miracle that even though being illegal, I was still presented with the opportunity to try it, because it changed my life from that day forward. So I'm just forever grateful.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Any questions for Roy? Tom?
Yeah, not really a question, just listening to your story that I look at as being kind of humorous. The part that really hit me, it went through my mind, is get off of methadone.
Yeah.
Nobody gets off of methadone.
Yeah. Well, that's,
for the most part.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
For life.
And that's the thing. So, not to get too deep into that, but basically when I got on methadone, I was told by the doctors, you'd only be on this for a few months, but once I got on, and I'm not blaming the doctor, I'm not blaming anyone. I'm just speaking experientially, but once I got on, and all the other people that have been going there every day, they're like, yeah, I've been here for years, and I don't ever see myself getting off of it. So the longer I was on it, the more it seemed like, okay, I'm never going to get off of it. And I really, truly, because the ability, just the withdrawals and everything that comes along with getting off it. It really wasn't until I had the experience, the psychedelic experience, where I was like, it had me convicted of the belief that I not only could get off it, but I needed to get off of it in order to save my life. Because being on the methadone, and it does save people's lives, and it helps some people, a lot of people, but it doesn't help everyone. It didn't. For me, it just perpetuated the use of illicit substances. But yeah, thank you for mentioning that, because that was one of the biggest feats of my life, being able to get off of it.
Great.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you for your testimony.
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate you coming.
Thank you.
So move to Sean Stratford. Did I pronounce that right?
You got it.
All right, thank you. for being here.
Thank you.
Identify yourself for the record and proceed.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Sean Straffen. I'm from Decriminalize Nature Nationwide. I live here in Vermont. I'm the appointed leader here in the state of Vermont. So just to follow a little on Rory's story, one of the benefits that I have from being part of a national group is I get to see some of the pitfalls of things that happen nationally in some of the states that have decriminalized and nearly legalized. And I also get the pleasure of hearing stories like Rory's from all over the country. And it is quite wonderful and something that I've decided to dedicate and devote my life to for as long as I need. So it's our findings through our experience with decriminalized nature that plant medicines of all shapes and psilocybin in particular have one infectious byproduct, and that is awareness and happiness and healing. We believe very strongly that a happy, conscious, empathetic, and compassionate person will do less harm, not only to themselves, but to others. They will find their way out of via perspective that they learn, that they feel, and they adopt through the hardest times of their lives. Many years ago, I suffered an incredible loss, a very significant one to me. It was the greatest relationship of my life, and I fell into alcohol because it was accessible, it was easy. The problem is that you cannot treat depression with a depressant. It just doesn't work that way, unfortunately, though I tried. After one single psilocybin experience, I realized that I was destroying myself, that I was not doing myself any good for myself, my children, or the people around me. So in that single dose, it gave me a new perspective, not only about myself, but what I was missing. And in my life, in my experience, I was never taught how to cope in a healthy way. Never taught really how to cope at all. And I was never taught the critical importance of personal and spiritual growth. I was never taught how to look at my own internal struggles or issues with the correct perspective. In our experiences, we have seen psilocybin and plant medicine help people in this critical way all over the country. It's unbelievably gratifying. So, these reflections, what they did was they gave me a new awareness. And this awareness for some is not only self. What we see around the country is that when people become more self-aware, they become more aware of their environment and the things that surround them and the people that surround them. And so when people become more aware of their environment, they naturally become more environmentally aware. And how much easier would it be for those of you pushing a climate or environmental change to be able to have a larger group of constituency that is more environmentally aware and self-aware and ready to help you do less harm? So Vermont right now, we're becoming synonymous with freedom. We took a Schedule I drug straight off of the Controlled Substances Act, and nothing burned down. We were able to see the benefit. We were able to see people start to thrive, new commerce, new taxes, new businesses, new people. I would urge you to just push the decriminalization part quickly, to see what it does, to see who comes into this state our new stories, our new blood, our new vision, our new perspectives. In Vermont, for the most part, we have the ability to live our lives the way we want to. Now we can even die with dignity, how we choose. I believe it to be time to heal in the way that we want to. I believe it's now time to allow ourselves an equitable, accessible way for all people to be able to have access to the things that not only healed Rory, but healed myself and others throughout the country that I have the pleasure to see every day. Thank you so much.
Questions, Joe?
Thank you so much for that testimony. It's very helpful. At the beginning of your testimony, you mentioned that you have the benefit of seeing the benefits and the pitfalls. I'm wondering, from your experience being part of a national organization, what are some of those pitfalls that you've observed?
So the worst and the most glaring is the $4,000 treatment in Oregon. So basically, there's so much bloat in that right now. And when I say that, I define it as there needs to be EMTs available, the insurance that it takes, blah, 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 facilitator, people watching facilitators, all of these other things that went along with the therapeutic model. It is now cost an individual $4,000 for an 8-hour session. Okay, that is not what I want to see here in Vermont. I don't think that's going to benefit anybody who actually needs it. It's going to become a process of the elite and makes all of this moot.
Thanks. And that $4,000 fee is due to, as you said, training requirements of the folks that are.
It's just what it costs because of everything that surrounds it, all the infrastructure that surrounds that actual guided therapeutic experience.
Anything else?
Did the same thing in Peru for 4,000.
You can get more than that in Peru for 4,000. You can actually get to Peru and back.
Other questions? I don't see any right now. Thank you so much.
Very good. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you. And Mason Marks, please. Is it professor, doctor, lawyer? What do we?
All three, but you can just call me Mason.
All right. Thank you very much. If you could identify yourself for the record and proceed.
Thank you so much, Chair Lalonde, Vice Chair Burdett, and members of the committee for having me. I'm Mason Marks, speaking today on my own behalf. However, I am a medical doctor and a law professor at Florida State University College of Law, where I teach drug regulation. I also co-founded and lead the Project on Psychedelics Law and Regulation, or POPLAR, at Harvard Law School's Petrie Flom Center. In 2021, I was appointed by Governor Kate Brown to serve on the Oregon Psilocybin Advisory Board, which helped create rules for Oregon's psilocybin program, and I chaired the licensing subcommittee on that board. So if you have questions about Oregon's program, I'd be happy to discuss that. I'd like to provide a little background and perspective on the topic of psychedelic regulation and specifically psilocybin, and please feel free to interrupt me at any time. I'm going to focus on the removal of criminal penalties first, which I believe, and I agree with your previous witness, that that's one of the most important parts of this bill. Back in 2019, Denver, Colorado became the first U.S. city to decriminalize psilocybin mushrooms through a local ballot initiative. And at the same time, the city established a psilocybin mushroom task force to monitor and report on the impact of this policy change. That task force includes a veteran, activists, and government and law enforcement officials. And after several years of decriminalization in Denver, the group reported that the policy decriminalizing psilocybin mushrooms had no discernible negative impact on public safety. Since then, we've seen about 15 other cities across the country follow Denver's example. They've decriminalized not only psilocybin, but other psychedelic substances like ibogaine and dimethyltryptamine. And they include cities like Oakland and Santa Cruz, California, Washington, D.C., Detroit, Michigan, Seattle, Washington, and Somerville and Cambridge, Massachusetts. We now also have 2 U.S. states that have decriminalized psilocybin, Oregon voters passed Measure 110 in 2020, and last November, Colorado voters passed Proposition 122, which decriminalized 5 psychedelic substances, including psilocybin. The US is not the only country where we see psilocybin decriminalized. Jamaica actually never decriminalized the substance, and there are a handful of psilocybin retreat centers that operate successfully there. Portugal decriminalized most controlled substances, including psychedelics, back in 2001, and that has been considered a great success. The country has taken a public health-oriented, harm reduction-focused approach to drug policy instead of a punitive law enforcement approach. The Netherlands actually allows psychedelics, including psilocybin-containing fungi, to be sold over the counter in stores. And about 10 years ago, the Dutch Ministry of Health commissioned a study to determine the public health impact of the availability of these fungi. And much like the Denver task force, that study found that the availability posed little or no risk to public safety. And closer to home, there are parts of Canada, including cities like Toronto, that have decriminalized controlled substances, including psychedelics. So suffice to say that we have a lot of experience with decriminalization, both throughout the United States and internationally, suggesting that decriminalizing psychedelics is safe and good public policy. I want to talk a little bit more about safety. At this point, psilocybin has been administered to hundreds of research subjects in FDA-sanctioned clinical trials. And in those trials, adverse events have typically been mild and time-limited. So things like mild nausea or transient anxiety. And the FDA has designated psilocybin a breakthrough therapy for depression, which means that it may represent a significant improvement over existing treatments like SSRIs, like Prozac and Paxil. The toxologic data that we have suggests psilocybin has very low toxicity, far lower than common substances like Tylenol and Advil. So it's considered relatively safe from a toxicologic perspective. Like anything, there are some risks, but they tend to be related to the subjective experience of consuming psilocybin rather than a toxic effect on one's cells or organs, at least as far as we can tell from current scientific information. Psilocybin, as you heard, is believed to be non-addictive. Most people don't use it habitually the way they might habit-forming substances like opioids. It does not produce the kind of euphoria that addictive substances produce. In fact, instead of being habit-forming, it appears to have an anti-addictive property. And that's why researchers are very excited about its potential use in addiction treatment. In fact, the first federally funded psychedelic clinical trial in 50 years is looking at the use of psilocybin for smoking cessation. And you may not know that cigarettes kill nearly 500,000 people every year in the US alone. So if psilocybin can take a chunk out of that statistic, that really would be miraculous. And of course, it could help mitigate the ongoing drug overdose crisis, which kills about 100,000 Americans each year. One of the reasons I'm so interested in these substances is the miraculous stories of people who have used them to address addiction. Like Rory, the witness you heard from, people often report significant improvements after just one dose. Not everyone, but many people do. They often simply lose the desire to smoke cigarettes, drink alcohol, or use cocaine or other substances, and it's really quite striking. Some other exciting uses include using psilocybin in end-of-life care, where it appears to alleviate end-of-life anxiety and existential distress or despair in people treated for cancer, for example, and PTSD as well, as you heard earlier. And there are some other more experimental uses associated with pain, migraine headaches, and even things like bipolar disorder or personality disorders, although those uses are more theoretical and speculative at this point. I mentioned that there can be some behavioral risks associated with psilocybin. People can find the experience frightening or anxiety provoking, but even in many of those cases, they often report the experience ultimately being meaningful or useful. And these behavioral risks are best managed, in my view, through education. And I argue that removing criminal penalties is a means of reducing the risk. It's actually a form of harm reduction, and I encourage you to think about it that way. People can be put into vulnerable states when they use psilocybin. There is some potential for abuse there, not abuse of the substances, but abuse of individuals by other people. And criminalizing these substances really just pushes that use into the shadows. People become afraid to come forward and report harms or unethical practices out of fear that they might be arrested, that they might lose their jobs, or somehow be penalized or discriminated against. Removing criminal penalties makes people feel more comfortable speaking openly about these things, educating others about safety, as well as encouraging the reporting of wrongdoing. So with that background in mind, and I've been studying various forms of psychedelic regulation that have emerged across the country over the past few years, and having reviewed H371, I think it's a very sensible bill. I encourage you to support it. It's kind of the best of both worlds, combining the decriminalization with this working group to study the feasibility of implementing a regulated program. It's actually quite a bit more conservative than Colorado, Oregon, and Connecticut's bills. And I want to point out that those programs are really quite different. They really exist along a spectrum. So I wouldn't just lump them in as a single category. And I can talk more about that if you're interested. But this bill is a bit more conservative. That will give you a little more time to figure things out, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. And if you do enact this bill, you won't be alone, because you'll be in the company of other U.S. states, international and U.S. cities, and even other countries. So I think it's a positive thing. I want to thank you for your time and attention, and I'd be happy to answer any of your questions.
Barbara, then Joe.
So thank you very much for your testimony. This is probably a fairly ignorant question, but going to college in the 70s, I'm familiar with that there's a variety of psychedelics, and I'm wondering if you can talk to why this bill and the research sort of concentrates on psilocybin, if there are vast differences between some of the other ones. I'm thinking about LSD in particular, but I know there are many more.
I support decriminalizing all of those substances. I think that's from a public health perspective and harm reduction perspective, that's the right thing to do. But I think this bill and others tend to focus on psilocybin because we do have the most information about them. The most people have been studied in clinical trials, and we do have a lot of that safety information about it. So I think that's why that tends to be the focus initially.
Thank you.
Then Wolf.
Thank you so much for your testimony. My question has to do, does psilocybin have an LD50? And if so, where does that relate to of like what a normal therapeutic dose would be?
So it does. I couldn't tell you what it is off the top of my head, but that ties in with the toxicologic information. It's believed that people could take a very, very, very high dose and not be physically harmed by it. I mean, they might have adverse psychological, reactions or a very challenging experience from it. But in terms of physical harm, that doesn't seem to be possible really to consume a dose that would kill you, for example.
And has there been anything in your research that's shown when a person is either intentionally or by mistake takes a high dose that there are lasting psychological harms, or is the psychological harm more transient, sort of an unpleasant trip, or perhaps a terrifying trip, but something that doesn't last? How does that relate?
That's a good question. I would say that in the overwhelming majority of cases, any adverse behavioral reaction will be temporary, but there are rare cases reported where people have persistent effects. It's not known how common that is because it is believed to be extremely rare, but in very rare cases, some people can have perhaps some perceptual distortions that might last for months. Maybe in exceptional cases, even longer. Even in those cases, they do tend to resolve at some point. That's something hopefully we'll have more information about, as research progresses, but it does appear to be extremely uncommon.
And just to be clear, that would only be if someone was taking a very high dose of psilocybin would result in some of those long-term
potential effects that you said?
I would say that's probably unknown, but likely the case.
Great, thank you.
Will.
Thank you. So you had mentioned being able to comment on Oregon and the system in place there. And I'm wondering if you could maybe address the concerns that the previous witness raised in regards to financial challenges with that system. Quite frankly, I would hate to implement something in Vermont that priced the average Vermonter out of the system.
It's a really big concern. I've heard estimates ranging from $1,000 or $1,500 up to $3,000 or more for a single session. So that's a series, a preparatory session where someone is kind of prepared for the experience, an administration session where they actually receive the substance, and a follow-up integration session. So many people obviously will be priced out of that. I think one of the problems with Oregon is that the advisory board tasked with creating these rules was not tasked with making the program accessible. That was not one of their mandates, or at least it wasn't emphasized by the governing agency that oversaw that board. So I would encourage you to make that one of the mandates of the. In Colorado, that is one of the board's mandates. That board was just recently formed, and they're in the very early stages of this process, which took 2 years in Oregon. And this kind of goes to the question of how much time this board should have. I would say probably at least a year. I mean, you can learn from some of the past experiences in other states. I do want to point one thing out about Oregon. There's a common misconception that it's a medical program. It's actually not. And under Oregon law, these facilitators that administer psilocybin are prohibited from making medical claims. They cannot diagnose or treat any health conditions. They can't even administer psilocybin in a healthcare facility. It's actually more akin to recreational cannabis, but with supervision. So you can take it for any reason. You don't need a medical diagnosis or prescription, but you do need to take it in the presence of one of these trained licensed facilitators. The Connecticut program is on the other end of the spectrum. Only a licensed healthcare professional can provide psilocybin, and Colorado is somewhere in the middle, kind of a hybrid of those two, and it may take a different direction, shifting towards one extreme or the other, probably medical, as the rules take shape over the next year and a half.
Thank you.
Karen.
Hi, thank you. Just as you're bringing this up, it's all new to me, so I'm trying to take it in of how it works then. So if you're saying in some of these states that anybody can use it, but they have to use it with somebody, I forget what you said the person's name is. It's in somebody's presence, a trained person. So what happens if somebody uses it without a trained person? Is that then illegal? What is the is it just nothing? I'm just trying to understand how, if we're saying that it's important to be with somebody for that security piece of it, how are we making sure that happens?
So I don't mean to overemphasize that. I think actually the best approach is to have both, and that is the intended, purpose of Colorado's bill or Colorado's ballot initiative. They created sort of I think of it as a mirror images of each other. There's the regulated program where licensed individuals provide psilocybin under supervision, and there's the personal use, unregulated side of that act, where people, communities of people, can provide psilocybin and the other 4 psychedelic substances. They can share them. They can effectively do what people can do on the regulated side, but they cannot claim to be licensed. They cannot sell the substances. They have to give them away if they are going to provide them. I actually think that's the best way to go about it. There were some attempts in Colorado recently to constrict the personal use side, and activists really pushed back against that. And at least for the time being, they have succeeded and preserved that part. But I think you want to have both, and there are many reasons for that. One of the reasons is that there are spiritual communities and churches, including indigenous communities, that use these substances, and so you want to create a space for them to do so. And they generally don't tend to be accommodated on the regulated side. but I don't think they should be the only groups that are able to use the substances. And in Colorado for many years, probably in Vermont as well, there are underground communities that already use these substances. And like I kind of stated earlier, by decriminalizing them, you bring them out of the shadows. And I really strongly believe that's in everyone's best interest.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful because I just couldn't see how it could be one way. I'm like, once you open it up, like there's going to be people that want to, like, I don't need the person with me. I can just do it on my own. So
I think I think of it like there are substances that are regulated and unregulated, like ibuprofen is a good example. You can go and get a prescription for it. You can buy it in the store. This is obviously very different from that, but it's analogous. You can't have these dual programs. Some people bristle at that a little bit and it feels a little bit odd, but it's possible. And I think on the personal use side, you just want to make sure there's a lot of public education.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
all right, can I ask, because I feel I'm just trying to get into this. I don't know if we had that as part of what this work group would do, but I guess this is just looking at the therapeutic piece of it. But for any of the states that you shared, like, do they have a public education campaign that they're going? I just feel like that would be a huge one, right? I know I'm just here like, okay, just learn about this. What is this? You know, all these questions. So you can just share.
That is built into Colorado's bill. That is something that the that board will be considering. It hasn't really been much of a part of Oregon's, but that's something that was emphasized in Colorado.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Not seeing any. Thank you so much for your testimony. And when we probably return to this, we're just kind of getting an introduction today, and we'll be digging into it presumably early next year because we're about a week away from this session being done. I personally would love to pass it out this year, but it wouldn't make it to the floor because there's limited floor time this year. But nevertheless, this is certainly something on our radar, and I appreciate it. So we may be getting a hold of you again as we keep on working on this. But for now, we'll move on to Melinda Moulton, please. Did I pronounce that right?
You did.
Right.
Yes, my name is Melinda Moulton. I just turned 73 and I am a member of the underground.
Excellent.
Thank you for having me. So here's my story. When I was 12 years old, I lost my mother suddenly, and my default was to stop eating. They say that one of the things that a child has total decision-making power over is eating. This provides them with a sense of control. Certainly, I was trying to control my circumstances, which were out in left field during that time. For 8 years, I weighed a mere 90 pounds. Today, I weigh 125. So I refused to eat except for low-calorie items, oranges, apples, pineapples, and pears, and I called myself a fruitarian. And that was to avoid judgment. I never ate lunch with my friends at school, and I was considered a bit of a weirdo. Because of a lack of food, I developed amenorrhea, which meant that I no longer had my period. My father frantically tried to find specialists to help me with what he considered a rebellious and stubborn phase. But at that time, during the early 1960s, anorexia was not a known mental health issue. With no diagnoses, they reported to him that I would probably never have children. Fast forward to my college years and being introduced to a psilocybin experience. That night, under the influence of these naturally grown mushrooms, I had a period. Woohoo. The journey to heal my mind and my body and return to a more normal life began in earnest. I was reborn with a sense of purpose and a lust for living. 2 years later, I was pregnant with my first child, Eli, who, by the way, is a lawyer. And he said to me, Mother, you've got to be a little quiet about this because you could be arrested in Vermont and go to jail. So he's very concerned about my livelihood. So why am I sharing all of this with you here today? Well, because I have firsthand knowledge that psilocybin mushrooms are a medical and mental health remedy. Did you know that the U.S. Food and Drug Administration recently assigned magic mushrooms with a breakthrough therapy designation? According to Compass Pathways, which is a mental health care company that is dedicated to supporting wide patient exposure, promoting evidence-based innovation in mental health, early studies, in quotes, have shown that psilocybin therapy can provide an immediate and sustained reduction in depression following a single treatment. The effect has been described as psilocybin shaking the brain up like a snow globe, or rebooting the brain, providing new connections and deactivating connections that might have caused depression. Reported experience have included personal feelings of peacefulness, discovery of self, unconditional love, heightened joy, openness, and a newfound ability to relate to the surrounding world. The earliest known written record about psilocybin is in the Florentine Codex compiled between 1529 and 1579. Since then, there has been much written about magic mushrooms, but for this testimony, I've chosen to focus on science and research. Here are a few of the findings. Emotions and brain function are positively altered up to 1 month after a single dose of psilocybin. Anxiety and depression are reduced for as long as 6 months. Long-lasting beneficial effects help people with life-threatening illnesses. Psychological flexibility is increased along with feelings of personal meaningfulness, resulting in an improved mental outlook. I've been reading scientific research papers that clearly show that magic mushrooms are effective in treating a plethora of mental and physical conditions in a safe way without lingering side effects. It is just a matter of time before we see mushroom treatment part of an accepted regimen. For those who suffer from, listen to this, cancer, impending death, depression, eating disorders, addiction, PTSD, migraines, anxiety, bipolar disorder, suicide, schizophrenia, phantom limb pain, and many other mental and physical conditions. In my concluding, Gary Fisher, the inventor of the modern mountain bike, has said, in quotes, "With psychedelics, if you are fortunate and you have a breakthrough, you understand what is truly of value in life. Material, power, dominance, and territory, they have no value. People would not fight wars, and the whole system we have currently would soon fall apart. People would become peaceful, loving citizens, not robots marching around in the dark with all their lights off." So for me, I will be grateful for the day when humans can freely use psilocybin to understand and embrace true consciousness and expand their psyche toward enlightenment where love transcends all else. So thank you for listening and supporting H371.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Any questions? I think it's fairly quite.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me tell my story.
Thank you so very much. Thank you so very much. We'll hear from Rick Barnett, please, next. Thank you. Thank you for being here, and if you could identify yourself for the record and proceed, I'd appreciate it.
Yep. Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Rick Barnett. I'm a licensed psychologist, doctorate, licensed alcohol and drug counselor. I'm also the co-founder of the Psychedelic Society of Vermont, which is currently about 170 non-paying members, just healthcare professionals who gather together once a month to discuss psychedelic research, treatment, psychedelic clinical scenarios, because people are more and more using psychedelics out in the natural world. And so we're seeing that in our practices. So being informed and talking to one another about what's coming up on the horizon with psychedelics is really important, and how to help people navigate this. So I'm also the chair of the legislative committee for the Vermont Psychological Association. That's one of the stakeholders on the advisory group that's listed in this bill. I did review this with the board of the Vermont Psychological Association, and they support this bill. And so they supported the Vermont Psychological Association being listed as a stakeholder in the bill. That was a surprise to me when it was on there, but I checked with the board and they were very supportive of it, because frankly, what you've heard is that there's a ton of research being done and has been done, not only recently, but going way back to the 1950s and 60s. So there's a ton of research that's been done on psychedelics. LSD primarily back in the 50s and 60s, as was mentioned earlier. More recently, MDMA, which is not classically a psychedelic, it's ecstasy, Molly. It's known as a love drug, which was legal until 1985. That's actually a drug that is being approved in 2024 for the treatment of post-traumatic stress disorder. So that's actually coming online in a medical model very soon. Psilocybin, as was mentioned before, was designated by the FDA or some agency, the government agency, as a breakthrough therapy status. So that is being fast-tracked in the research to try to get FDA approval. But what H371 does, which is really interesting, has been talked about, is that it's kind of a parallel track. We've heard a lot about the research. We know that there's medical benefits for this. That's being proven time and time again. And you know what? The medical model is going to march on, and that's going to be available for people when the FDA and all those processes go through. And we're looking at 2026, 2027, more likely, when psilocybin in pill form, a pharmaceutical version of it, will be available in a medical model. But H371 looks at the decriminalization piece, which is personal use, personal grow, personal possession. We had that with cannabis, where people could grow up to, 2 mature plants, 4 immature plants, so that per member per household, people could use it with their friends, stuff like that. H371 kind of looks like that for decriminalizing psilocybin. So if I wanted to grow psilocybin at home and I wanted to use it at home, I wanted to share it with friends, it's not under some, shadow of illegality anymore. And that's really, really important when it comes to the fact that more and more people are actually growing their own mushrooms, using their own mushrooms, but there's still this stigma, there's still this fear of some sort of legal retribution. That doesn't bode well if you're trying to create a nice scenario to have a psychedelic journey, if you're afraid that, the cops are going to come busting down your door any day. So removing it from this list of illegal drugs in Vermont would be huge for the tons of people out there that are growing, using, sharing psilocybin right now as we speak. The advisory group model, which is really cool, is really a process by which we've heard we can look at what's working well in other states and other jurisdictions, what's not working well. And from a therapeutic standpoint, whether it's public education campaign, licensed facilitator model, or simply just supporting other healthcare practitioners out there and trying to figure out what's the best way we can allow people to use psilocybin in optimal ways with the most safety and the most efficacy. And so an advisory group can help recommend to the legislature what some better model might look like for the state of Vermont. So I really think just a lot of people have covered so many different things. I can say personally, I've had personal experience with psychedelics. I would not be in long-term recovery from addiction myself if it wasn't for my use of psychedelics when I was a kid. That opened me up to a whole new world where I could be receptive to the message of recovery. Otherwise, I don't think I would have been receptive to it. And I've seen it in a number of patients. I work with ketamine right now. Ketamine's a sort of a psychedelic drug that's being used legally, FDA approved. MDMA, like I said, is coming online, and psilocybin is the next generation of that in a medical model. But I really do think because it's a natural substance, to remove it from the illegal list, to allow people to have access to it without this fear of legal repercussions is really a key element of that. I'm being a little bit redundant there. The last thing I will say is just what Melinda was saying, is that this is not just a medical issue. We are in an opioid drug death crisis. We are in a mental health crisis, and these drugs are being studied for mental health and addiction issues. But as we just heard, it is transdiagnostic. We're talking about pain, bipolar, we're talking about addiction, we're talking about migraines, we're talking about what it is to be a human being. So having human beings have access to substances that can help whatever they're struggling with, whether it's a diagnosed medical condition or not, is really important. So that's what this bill does. It's pretty cool. And I'm really grateful that you guys have decided to take it up. I'm really grateful for Representative Troiano and China for getting a hearing on this, and for all of the people who provided testimony. It's been fantastic. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions? I don't see any. We're very unquestioning today, apparently. Good, excellent. Angela, I knew if I prompted, we'd get a question or two.
I'm wondering if you can, as a practitioner yourself, how would you dream up the therapeutic use of psilocybin? Like, how would you, I know it's not necessarily something that would be written into the bill, but can you paint us a picture of, like, we're hearing about in Oregon, it's prohibitively expensive. We'd want to avoid that here. What kind of model could you see working?
So it's I think there's 2 tracks. So one track is that, so I also completed a year-long psychedelic training program through the California Institute on Integral Studies. There's a number of psychedelic training programs for healthcare professionals, for clergy, for attorneys. So following a regimented training program for individuals who are interested in learning about this in a more in-depth way, that provides a structure so that someone has the tools, the skills to be able to help someone who might come to them and say, hey, I want to have a psychedelic experience. I heard you were trained in it, whether you're licensed or not. That's really important to me, because I want to work with somebody who knows what they're doing. The other thing is what was talked about before, which is this public education. I mean, there's just so much information now on these substances and what the risks and the benefits are, and how to structure a container, we call a container, structure an experience where someone gets to talk about why they want to use the psychedelic substances with somebody who's going to hold space for them, sit with them, create an environment where someone could sit in the woods, in a cabin, in their homes, somewhere to have a 6 to 8 hour journey, and then to be there afterwards if something comes up and they want to process it a little bit more. So that doesn't have to be an expensive model. That doesn't have to be a medical model. It can be done through public education. So that's, I envision that it's not just one or the other, that the medical model is going to take care of itself. This hybrid model that Oregon has with the licensed facilitators, which has a lot of bloat, as decrim nature person said, Sean. And then there's just like personal use, and can personal use be offered to people through minimal public education campaigns, just so they know the basics of how to do it. I'm saying that as a licensed healthcare professional, as I've gone through a lot of training on a lot of different fronts. So I'm saying that this can be done safely without all of the training that I've had. Does that help answer your question?
Yeah, I guess I'm trying to picture just trying to picture what it would look like, and knowing different, like how ayahuasca ceremonies work, and like wondering if we would just be opening it up to like groups of people doing this together with like an angel person present, that sort of thing. Like there are a lot of different forms this can take. I wouldn't want to limit it.
Right. Community. Someone had mentioned community. I think it was Rory in his testimony. Community is really important. The reason why I co-founded the Psychedelic Society of Vermont is because I wanted a community of healthcare providers who could talk about this stuff freely and not for fear of retribution or fear of license question and that kind of stuff. Community everywhere in Vermont, little communities and little towns and little locales that know that, hey, this group of people, they're known to be safe users of this substance. Can we talk to them and they can hold space for, and so it can be done freely and safely and effectively in small, Vermont's a perfect place for it, really.
Sure.
So first I'll just share, I am supportive of decriminalization efforts. So in general, so I'm maybe asking these questions more out of curiosity and just trying to understand things. How prevalent would you say use is right now? Because I have to say, I don't hear of, there's this huge mushroom use, like where I feel like you hear with other drugs. And so I'm like, well, is this opening up a new thing? Will people be trying it and they don't know they're going to be vulnerable, and all that? So it just makes me curious, how prevalent is it? Do you have a sense?
I maybe run in different circles. I feel like
you're like, I know a lot of people.
People. Microdosing is a thing, and you can get microdoses sent to you from other states and stuff. As illegal as it is, there's tons of people that are microdosing. A lot of people actually start with microdosing because they're afraid of the bigger psychedelic experience. So they'll try microdosing, and that's extremely popular, very accessible. A lot of people come to my office and say, yeah, I got a bunch of microdoses. What should I do? How do I do this? That kind of stuff. So providing education, harm reduction. I would say in my experience, there's a lot of people not just using psilocybin, but LSD, DMT, which is the active ingredient in ayahuasca, and other substances generally in this category. It's becoming more and more prevalent, which again makes this even more and more important that we do something sooner than later, because people are using it anyway, and we just need to stay up with it. That's all.
I think that's just helpful to know, because I feel like there's that piece of, if folks are using it, we don't want to criminalize it if there isn't a harm in it, so thank you.
Tom.
Thank you. So we decriminalized marijuana, and we know that federally it's still technically illegal, and we could face consequences for that, I suppose. But it seems unlikely right now that the federal government's interested in anything to do with that. What's their posture on psychedelics, mushrooms, whatever? Because I don't know.
That's a great question. Thank you. One of the people that we'd hoped to testify today is a representative, the founder and the executive director of the Psychedelic Medicine Coalition, which is a DC-based federal group designed to raise money for science for psychedelics. And she also, Melissa Lavasani is her name, and too bad she couldn't be here. She also worked on decriminalization in the DC area before she served on this federal commission. But as far as I know, it's very similar to cannabis, is that the federal government is not interested in going after small psilocybin operations. I think there's been some accounts where there's been people in California, the Bay Area, of course, and of all places, where someone was so bold as to basically put up a storefront saying, we sell psilocybin mushrooms here. which is basically like, please come arrest me. And I think the feds did come in and shut them down. But I really do think that it's a very low enforcement priority, even at the federal level.
I'll follow that up with, is there some interest in you bringing this forward so that if we legalize it, so that you can do what you want at home, so that it doesn't advance to the level in which the FDA gets control of it and starts, well, putting it into the hands of the drug companies, essentially?
That's exactly what we want to do.
But that's why I was asking.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Because, like I said, we're going to let the FDA, we're going to let the medical process, research, all that kind of stuff, go through their phase 3 trials, get number 2 of them down, start to roll out all the regulations around it and deliver it through insurance, CPT codes, therapies, hospitals, all that kind of stuff. That's going to happen. And some people are going to profit from that. But there could be a parallel track where people can use it outside of that system. And that's a huge part of this bill.
Any other questions? I'm not seeing any more. Thank you so very much. I really appreciate it. Let's complete our testimony on this, unless Mary Sullivan wants to have the last word. No, you're good. Okay, nice.
Times, Mary?
Yeah, nice to see you back. Nice to see you back. So, all right. So this will be something I think I mentioned that I thought about trying to maybe even get more testimony passed out since it's a study and such. But there's not going to. I doubt that there's going to be time on the floor. So this can probably wait. Just an update on S4. Final thing we're trying to get out of here. Oh, where's our clerk? I was going to have him close the roll.
Well, I don't know.
Yeah. All right. So we're about to close the vote on 89, and I'm hoping to actually vote out S4.
Thank you.
No. We're getting so we have a version, the latest, putting in the latest stuff that we, wait for a second. A couple of
Clearly shut the door again.
Yeah, if we could shut the door again. So.
Wait, or open that more. I can open that.
So there's a version of S4 that is currently in editing. I'm hoping we actually get it in time to be able to vote on that edited version. In the interim, as you will see on an email that I sent to everybody, I sent you an email from Judge Zone that he had sent at 8:30 this morning, and for some reason I didn't get it until this afternoon. I mean, I actually saw it this morning, but the language wouldn't load up for some reason. And he has 2 suggestions. I do not think they're significant. I think they're clarifications. And my suggestion is that if we get the edited version, we go ahead and vote that out so we can get it on the notice calendar and just move it over to appropriations to give us some flexibility, because otherwise it doesn't get to appropriations until Monday, I guess. But this will give us some flexibility, and I will put together an amendment that I'll just, I'll sponsor or Karen can sponsor that does these couple tweaks that Judge Zone. But the upshot, though, is Zone didn't have a problem with what we're trying to do with this. I think that's the key part, because the 2 changes are not, frankly, significant, but I think important enough to merit an amendment. So that's kind of my game plan. I should have scheduled more testimony, but I guess we're free for a half hour, perhaps.
Did you text by any chance to come in to finish the roll? Wasn't that what we needed to?
Oh yeah, can you text? No, we have a couple of things this afternoon still, but if he's around, we can at least get that out the door. So let me just ask folks.
Who's left?
What's that? Barbara wasn't here this morning on S89.
Oh, on S89?
Forensics.
Wait, wasn't I here?
You had to vote.
Yeah, no, I thought I did vote on that.
Did you? No, you're missing.
I thought you voted too.
Yeah, and then he scraped it
Scratched
off. Scratched out. But
that's good. Okay.
So tomorrow, The only thing I would like to do besides, tomorrow, 8:30, room 267, we're going to have a joint hearing with government operations to go over the, the resolution that is being sent to GovOps on impeachment process. So we'll do that tomorrow at 8:30 at the Pavilion Building, right after the floor or right after lunch. Let's see. Well, actually, it'll be the end of the morning if we're out, which we probably won't be. No, actually, I'm sorry. I'll take it back. So Scott Beck asked me a while ago to look at H-135. It has to do with defamation that can be brought by an estate, defamation against somebody who's passed. And I told him that we try to get to it by the end of this year, just get introduced. And a main person who was asked for this happens to be in the State House tomorrow. So I'd like to accommodate that. What's that?
What is the number?
It's H-135, I think. Wait, let me make sure I got it. No, 351. Apparently, when I wrote this down, I was having dyslexia or something. 351. And so if people can at least stick around, I will schedule it for 1:15. It'll probably be just 15 minutes, but I'm really just trying to accommodate a fellow member who has the person who's behind this bill. Other than that, I'm not going to put anything else on afternoon unless people want to line up a bunch of stuff. But I think we need the afternoon on Friday tomorrow off. I think we've done great work with it.
Are we going back to the floor tomorrow?
Or we're going to go back. Yeah, that's right. We are going back to the floor tomorrow. So I will see who wants to walk up to the tower with me tomorrow afternoon after our afternoon.
Discuss H-371.
All right, which one's 371? Oh, we just heard?
Yeah. Are you sure we can't move that one?
So here's the question. I don't know if it has to go to Human Services, we can move it out of here and have it go up to Human Services and sit till next week.
Doesn't go to health?
So the other thing, actually, you know what?
Repeating all of this stuff next time.
You know what I think I might schedule for tomorrow afternoon is something that we're actually supposed to look at, which is
312?
No, safe injection sites.
Yeah.
72? It's in Human Services. They may be passing out this afternoon. We have to do a drive-by. I think it's the same kind of immunity, but they want us to do a drive-by. So I'm going to schedule that. And I forgot all about the fact that we're going to be back on the floor at 2:30, whatever, 3 or whatever it is tomorrow. Anything else that people want? Or we could talk about 371? That would be fine.
Can we take this vote here so I can?
Yes, I'm sorry.
It's my business.
Yeah, go ahead.
So this is roll on SAD.
I know, so I'm wondering what we voted on. So I'm confused what we voted on. What was it? Did we do another change since we last voted on SAD 9?
No, you had it this morning.
Okay, yes, okay. Jeez, all right.
Rachelson?
Yes.
I was hoping you're going to say no. You'd be the only no vote. 11-0.
Did you say it loudly enough?
11-0.
Thank you.
I have my job. You have your job. I thought
just
we set
making sure
those
you were doing
boundaries.
that job well.
Ken, I think we should.
We'll go offline. Thank you. We're adjourning until 8:30 at the Pavilion tomorrow morning. Right. Thank you very much, Panina. No, we have two things that we have to do. Oh my goodness.
Wait, we're not doing the pavilion?
No.
We are.
Just before that.
We are going to not adjourn. We're just, I guess, recessing until right after the floor when we're going to be going over H-230, the proposal of amendment from the Senate. Thank you, Panina, for saving me. And S4, if we have the edited version. Even if we don't have the edited version.
You're not going to let us sleep on it?
No.
We're in opposite camp.
We've been losing sleep over this for the past 3 weeks, so.
I want to clear it out of my nasal passages.
Yes.
Yeah, but where's it going?